Thank you, and good morning. Please, a round of applause for that wonderful introduction. And it's my great pleasure to be here and to have the opportunity to address so many wonderful, committed educators who have not only today committed themselves to the theme of the power of promise, which we'll talk about quite a bit, but also who have committed themselves to, I think, what I have come to see and understand as one of the most rewarding careers there is, and that is to be an educator. I come from a couple of educators, not educators in the same sense that most of us in the room would think about. Some of those you'll hear about in the keynote, but my dad had 13 brothers and sisters, and his father had about 13 brothers and sisters, so there's a whole lot of Strayhorns somewhere in the world, and most of those are either pastors, preachers, deacons, or teachers. And to me, in many ways, what they've committed themselves to is the same kind of life of education, instruction, edification, and uplift, which is a very rewarding career that you commit yourself to the improvement and reprovement of other individuals. So what I want to do this morning in the time that I have with you is to speak about the essence of our work, to connect it to the theme of the power of promise, to draw some connections between that theme and my research on sense of belonging and student success, and hopefully to do it in a way that not only keeps me in the confines of the time I have with you, but also keeps your attention. And so I have a couple of tools or strategies to do that along the way. The first of which is my coffee, which I forgot over here on the table. So I'm just going to go get that. And then I'm going to come back up here. Okay, so the first of these is to share with you that, as I mentioned, I want to say special thanks to a couple of folks in the room who I know played a really important role in my being here. And I think she walked out of the room, but Carmen's somewhere around.
She's right over there.
Oh, okay, right over there. Yeah. Let's just clap for Carmen in her absence, and maybe we can for connecting with me and my team early on. I was looking back at some of the notes a few weeks ago. So this started, we had conversations at the turn of the year. We had a prep call in January, and here we are almost to March, and it comes alive and it happens. So it's exciting. I remember when I had my prep call back in January with the team, one of the things that I marked on my form was they mentioned that how many people they expected for the day. And the caveat that stood out in my mind was depending on the weather. And although I live in Memphis, Tennessee now, where yesterday was like 65 degrees and sunny, but I spent 7 years of my career at the Ohio State University in Columbus, Ohio, so I know something about these kinds of winters, which is exactly why I need to get on the plane and get out of here today. But as I was coming from Des Moines to Ames, I was mentioning to my table this morning, I was struck by the number of cars that were on the side of the road and ditches and so forth. So I knew that something had happened here in Iowa before I arrived. So I echo the sentiments of Carmen and her team to say thank you for those of you who braved the elements and the weather to get here. And it's not just on the road. I mean, even if you walk on the sidewalk from the parking garage here, you're slipping and sliding. So thank you for making your way to this room. I promise that at least what I've seen on the schedule, this talk, the talks to come, the breakout sessions, they're all worth it. And so you'll leave with something as a result of the bravery that you've experienced. Shown on the screen is my social media. If you're a person who's on social media, I invite you to connect with me. Terrell Strayhorn is my personal Twitter, Instagram, all of those things. The one for my educational consulting firm is Do Good Work. And if you're a person who says, you know what, I like to be in touch with the speaker with my questions, not usually in large sessions like this, but afterwards, once I let my thoughts marinate for a moment, my email address is on the screen, or you can just take a picture of this slide and see if you want to use this information later. I do invite you to connect with me, especially to hear ideas about how you put some of these ideas into practice, And I also would love to hear, I'll plug in several points along the way, some of the promises that you make and that you will deliver upon as educators here at this conference. So let's review for a moment our goal for the day, and specifically a question that I think resonates with me profoundly in the morning before I give talks like this, and that is, why are you here? You know, you're here because hopefully you came to this conference to get something, to not only connect with people who are here at the conference or who are here at your table, but to get some ideas and insights and tools that will improve your own practice, your own ideas, your own work with students. If you have not looked recently at a dictionary, the textbook definition of the word conference is a gathering over an extended period of time. That could be extended minutes, days, weeks, however long you want to stay here. An extended period of time, a gathering of like-minded individuals. But the collegiate dictionary definition of the word conference says this, that it's a gathering of like-minded individuals over an extended period of time that has two purposes. Conferences, wherever they happen, in Ames, Iowa, in Memphis, Tennessee, across the coast, or even in the United States, conferences only have two purposes. First is to reach consensus. It brings together like-minded individuals to agree to some stuff. That there are some things that students must do to be geared up and ready for college. They have to fill out the FAFSA. They have to know how to fill out the FAFSA. And by the way, not just them, but their villages, their families, their neighbors, their grandmas, aunties, uncles, cousins, whoever their support, has to be educated or informed about that very, very complex form and system, so they can ultimately access aid that they need to go to college. That's something we've got to agree to. If you don't agree with me on that, stick here at the conference long enough, and by the end of this conference, you'll agree to that. So the first is we reach consensus. But the second objective of a conference, which is actually the most difficult to provoke, is change. We come together from across cities and states and miles to conferences like this one, not just to agree to some stuff, like all students are important. And if you don't agree with me on that one, stick around long enough. By the end of this talk, hopefully you'll have that commitment. But the second thing is that we'll reach some change. We'll start to think differently about things that we currently think. We'll start to believe that some of our current practices and our current policies, our current ways of thinking might need to be adjusted. If you are a person who's still giving presentations, talking at staff meetings, talking to your own team about millennials, you need to be at this conference, because millennials are no longer in college. They're usually in graduate school. Most of them are in the audience, by the way. So when I go to conferences and people say things like, oh my gosh, these millennials in college, I'm like, let me pack my bags and leave. Because this is what happens in higher education. It takes us some time to catch up. Right now, most of us at traditional places are educating like very, very late millennials, but most of us are educating what we call Generation Z. That generation has not even adopted a name yet. The tendencies and the traits of that generation are not well documented yet. So right now we're working with a group of students about whom we know very little. And even our very best practice is borrowed from the past, applied to the present as we wring our fingers and hope that it will make a difference. So conferences like this are important for us to, one, reach consensus about some stuff that really does work, but also to have debate and dialogue and sessions and Q&A so that we can ultimately reach change about some of our practices. Now, the question that's the second question is up for you. That is, why are you here? Did you really come because you wanted to reach consensus about some stuff? Did you really come because you were willing to change some perspectives or ways of thinking? Did you really come so that you can adopt some new information or best practices? Or did you come because someone told you to come? Did you come because you wanted to see someone? All of those things are important, but there's a subtext to that question that I think is important on a cold day like today. And that is, if you pause for a moment, what is it you want from today? What is it you want from this conference? Yes, you'll get information, you'll get handouts, but what is it that you yourself need in order to be more effective in the role that you currently said? Every now and again, I loved what was said earlier. in the opening comments, every now and again, I find myself speaking at conferences to people who don't even realize that they're exhausted, professionally, tired, worn out. Some of this is because they've been at this for a long period of time. Some of it's because their campus happens to be, sort of embattled with a number of challenges, pushed to do more with less. Their offices. I have a buddy who works at a campus in Houston who called me yesterday and said that his entire unit is facing, release from all of their jobs. So those are the realities of those of us who work in higher education. As I heard the mention of the grants, usually when grants start to either expire or go up for renewal, people start wondering what will happen if we're not renewed? What will happen to the work? What will happen to the program? So if you're in that position and that's on your mind, embrace that. Accept that, engage it, because part of that is why you're here, and I hope it's part of what you'll get from this conference. Now, I thought it was important for me to think about the theme. The theme of your gathering, as I was instructed, is the power of promise, borrowed from the national meeting, but also brought me to this point, and that is, what is a promise after all? The definition of the word promise, hopefully you can see this on the screen, is it's a declaration or assurance that one will do a particular thing or that a particular thing will happen. A promise. It's a declaration. To declare means to say out loud. Declaration. That's why I love what was said earlier when we write down what we promise to do, that we don't just write it on paper, that we tell our colleagues. We tell someone at our table. We tell someone here on our conference, at our conference tables or in our sessions. Tell someone, that's a declaration that you will do something or that something will happen. That's what a promise is. The second is, a promise is to assure someone that one will definitely do, give, or arrange something, undertake, or declare that something will happen. The power of promise is that our promises actually eventuate or happen once we declare them. Now, part of this is not magic. Part of this is what we call positive psychology. If you've ever worn a pair of Nikes, if you look on the side of a Nike box, it says, just do it. If you go into a KIPP academy anywhere in the country, you'll see statements all across the walls like, just do it. You can hang on in there. Things get better. You'll see some of these in the slides. Positive psychology is one branch of psychology that has really grown in popularity in the past decade. And what we've learned from that body of work is this, that most of what we do because we first had a set of beliefs in place that led to a set of behaviors that made it happen. Said differently, we don't do things that we don't believe we can do. If I were teaching psychology, why don't I just experiment here? I teach a course in higher education called Social Psychology of Higher Education. I wrote a textbook on it years ago. There's a chapter on belonging in there. What I do in that book is I talk about book chairs like this. Okay, so when we go to a chair and sit down, there's actually a whole lot going on that caused me to sit down in this chair. You don't see it because it's not like I have a sign on my shirt and there aren't little bubbles above my head telling you all the thought patterns that led to me sitting in that chair. But if you can accept for now that what actually takes place when I sit in this chair is I've made an assessment, first of all, of the chair. Whether or not it can hold me. Does it look sturdy? Does it look firm? Every now and again we want to test it, move it, shake it, see if the floor can hold it. Secondly, also connected with my present day evaluation of this chair is a past evaluation of the last time I sat in a chair like that. And if I fell out of a chair like this, I'm hesitant, I'm less willing to do it because I've got a whole lot of history that leads up and connects with my present day assessment of it and decides whether or not I'm going to sit down. So the behavior you see is me sitting down, but what you can't see are all the thought patterns that led to a set of beliefs. And the beliefs sound like this. This chair seems sturdy. The last time I sat in a chair like this, it worked out okay for me. I think I'm willing to do this. I think this chair can do it. If all I got to do, I think I can get down and get back up. So I may as well go ahead and try it. And you know what? There it is. It happens. The reason why that's important is because when we set promises to ourselves and when we make promises to students and ultimately coach students on making these promises, we have to appreciate that what we're really dealing with, and we saw it in the Gear Up slide, the Gear Up video this morning, the words that people were holding up, there was a gentleman who held up the word beliefs, another one that held up a word self-confidence, that made me make note. Those are the thought patterns over which we have control. It is very, very difficult to change human behavior. We have far more success changing people's thought patterns. So as educators committed to gearing students up for education and for college, our first port of entry into changing their outcomes is through changing their thought patterns. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is to help you realize that we have the power to help them set and make promises, and ourselves make promises, but for students to make promises, and we do it largely through education, which is all about changing thought patterns. Education is the process of receiving or giving systematic instruction. It's an enlightening experience. If you look at the word education in Latin, it is the word educare, which means to draw out the light that is within. So part of our job as educators, no matter where we are in our institutions or programs, whether we're director or coordinator or assistant to the director or past director or just a willing volunteer in the program, all of us have the power to draw out the light that is within the students. But remember, it starts with one reason why we come to conferences: consensus and change. We have to agree to something, and that is there is light within every student. Every single student has gifts and talents worth excavating, worth accessing. Now, the student you're working with, their gifts and talents don't look like the gifts and talents of the student that I'm working with, and vice versa. The student you worked with yesterday may not have the same gifts, talents, and abilities as the student you'll work with next week. But it has to begin with what educators have written about for centuries now, and that is that all educators have to have high expectations of all students. That we have to believe there's something that students have. This is, again, tracking on to positive psychology. All students have strengths or assets, not just a set of liabilities. They come with gifts and talents that they can bring to bear in their educational experience. Part of our job is helping them figure out what those gifts, talents, and abilities are, and then how to use them, deploy them in the educational setting, that might be school or college, to find success. Education is that process where we start to do that for students. Now, the reason why this is important is because these skills, these gifts, these talents are what students will need to possess in order to get what they want from education. Turns out, students don't come to education to work with us. They don't come to college or school to work with us. No matter how good you look, no matter how tall you are, you look great, but I'm saying, students don't come to any of our institutions or programs to work with us. If you don't believe me, go ask them. What they will tell you is, time and time again, students come to Iowa State and the University of Iowa, LeMoyne-Owen College, Gear Up, Gear Down, anybody's program. Why? Because they want to get a job. Now, the question is, when you ask employers, what is it that you want from students? Employers say this to us: they want certain gifts, talents, and abilities that in the raw are in all of our students. Shown on the screen are 9 of these gifts, talents, and abilities that employers say they want. The sources for these are Money Magazine and Forbes Magazine, and you can find them anywhere. Anytime I'm in the airport lounge, I'll open up a magazine and there's another story about employers wanting certain skills in our students. So I would say also to those of us who are faculty or instructional faculty that on the screen are 9 objectives, learning objectives. The question is, at the end of your program, at the end of your course, at the end of your experience, what evidence do you have that students have these abilities? That students who participate in your programs, activities, and experiences can work well with diverse others? And what evidence do you have that they work well, but not just work with, but work well with? Employers want graduates of our programs and institutions who can make decisions and solve problems, not just identify problems, but come up with plans. Maybe the plans don't work, but be able to develop a plan for solving a problem or seeing their way out of a situation. Employers are looking for graduates of all of our programs and institutions who, listen to this, can plan, organize, and prioritize work. This one's really, really difficult. Most data coming out of the HARRY Institute, Higher Education Research Institute at UCLA, the National Survey of Student Engagement at the University of Indiana, at Indiana University. So these two national surveys yield insights that help us understand that most college students today have very little evidence of growth in that domain. Why? I'll admit, as a former faculty member, I still have faculty staff. I don't teach in classrooms. I'm going to teach this tomorrow at a classroom because I begged one of my divisional chairs to let me teach. I miss it. But when I was in the classroom more regularly, I realized that part of the reason why students don't get opportunities to plan, organize, and prioritize their work is because faculty do it for them, largely through the syllabus. Day one, we tell students, here's how the 15 weeks are going to go, or the 10 weeks if you're on quarters, or whatever your period might be. And then we tell them, and here are the assignments and what order they're going to happen. And most faculty who really want students to be successful will break down large assignments into smaller chunks and say things like, we have a 15-page term paper due in 15 weeks. 1 page due per week, 1 paragraph due per class session, whatever it might be. Before you know it, while it helps the assignment get done, it denies the student of a learning opportunity to learn how to plan, prioritize, organize, make decisions about learning tasks. Now, I'm not against the syllabus. That's not the point of this argument. What I am saying is that if we're going to offer the syllabus with so much structure, how might we build into our programs and experiences and curriculum opportunities for students to make decisions about which assignment they'll do first, which problem they will tackle first, and why they will tackle it. In the second edition of the Belonging book, which just came out, I have a call-out box that is a pen pal sort of message between me and an instructor at a community four-year college in Michigan. This instructor heard me speak about this exact matter, and what she did is she went back to her class, and she didn't change her syllabus. She kept the syllabus, but what she started doing for certain assignments, it was a science instructor, chemistry if I'm not mistaken, would give students 3 problems and say you have to complete all 3 problems, but I'm not going to tell you which one to do first. I've given you the lecture, I've given you the example. I want you to figure out which one you want to do first. Complete the 3 problems, but there's an added part of the assignment. You got to write a short statement for me to tell me, 1, which one did you do first? What did you do second? And which did you do third? And why? Students would tell this instructor, wow, that was really cool. It wasn't a demanding assignment, but what she learned, and she writes to me about, is that some students would tackle one problem first because they perceived it to be easy. After they got into the problem, they realized it was very, very difficult, more complex than they imagined, and they learned about themselves as a learner, as a worker, that part of their decision-making process is they make judgments about how easy something is. They learn that they're quite inaccurate about that. So they stop using that as a way of gauging which thing they tackle. Imagine what that does for them when they move into the workplace and they have to solve problems or tackle big issues. And they know that their natural inclination is to make wrong assessments about the ease of a task. So all of this is really important information for us to give to our students who ultimately need evidence of learning in these domains to get the jobs that they want, the jobs that they, dare I say, came to education for in the first place. Working well in diverse teams, planning and prioritizing their work, selling and influencing others, and the one I love to talk about is having evidence that they're good storytellers and that they're able to maximize story. Now I gotta be honest with you, I did not know or believe that this was something that employers really wanted when I first read about it. I mean, after all, what is it that large employers could do with good storytellers? And what I did was I was a speaker at a business technology conference, large business technology conference, and I had the opportunity to sit down with CEOs and HR directors and so forth from lots of companies, and I had this slide up and I said, so I want to pause here and ask, is this real? Before I could even stop, I mean, hands are flying up all across the room. With people from industry and business and education and healthcare saying, absolutely, we want people who are good storytellers. Why? One, if you're a good storyteller, you're probably going to have a great interview. Because if students can tell one story really well, it should be their own story. Question for us in education is, how do we equip our students to tell their own story well? How do we even give our students opportunities to learn what their story is? It was a keynote at Cornell University that clued me into sometimes our campus environments and programs can be set up in ways that students become embarrassed about their story. I'd given a talk about belonging. At the end of my keynote about belonging, had a panel of students who spoke, and one Latina student talked about the fact that she wanted to tell her peers who she really was. With tears in her eyes, she said, no, you don't understand. Most of you think that I am this because that's what I told you. But actually, that's not true. My mom and dad didn't go to Cornell. My mom and dad didn't graduate from Cornell. My mom and dad didn't even go to college at all. But she had told students this because so many students that she met at Cornell, their moms or dads, went to Cornell Law, went to Cornell, whatever. And before you know it, she made up a story to sort of fit in. We'll come to this when I get to belonging. So many students strive to satisfy their need to belong by simply fitting in. And the behaviors that students use to fit in are not always authentic. Sometimes we change our name, change our style of dress, change our hair, change our own things that we're interested in. Before you know it, we're declaring minors or majors and engaging in activities that we actually would not normally consider because we want to be accepted. So what we're really trying to do is build educational environments, learning environments where students can feel free to be themselves and believe, based on our promise to them, that we will still support them, we will still accept them just as they are. Part of this is dependent on setting goals. I want to just show you these questions. If I were those who are taking pictures, I take pictures of this. These are good prompts to use with students. So for students to make their way into success, to acquire the skills I'm talking about, and ultimately to set promises that they can achieve, students have to have goals. One question that I ask students all the time is, one, where are you headed? A student on the move who has no idea where they're headed is a dangerous student. So one, where are you headed? Secondly, how will you get there? What students, I think, get from us and the kinds of programs that we're building are plans, ideas for getting to where they're going. I've met students all the time, all across the country, who say things like, you know what, I'm trying to go to this college, or I'm trying to get this job. And when I ask them, how will you get there? They might be full of promise, but very, very light on plans. And promises and plans actually go hand in hand. Promises are without plans usually are unfulfilled. And promises without plans and certainly goals usually never are achieved. So I think part of the power of our promise has to be to help students set plans. Plans of what they're going to do to maximize their experiences in high school. What are they going to do to maximize their experiences in the summer? What are they going to do to prepare themselves for the college they're going to? I am a vice president at my current institution and vice president of academic and student affairs, but I'm a vice president who has an Opendoor Policy with everybody I try on my campus, but I certainly am unapologetic of my commitment to students. It's hard for me to do research on student success and to be a sort of public student advocate and then to be anti-students in my administrative practice. So although I support my faculty fully as the chief academic officer, and I support all of our student affairs staff as the Chief Student Affairs Officer, I am unapologetically available to my students. And so I tell students all the time, I want you to have meetings, I want you to have appointments with me, but if you've got a pressing problem and my door is open, you just come right on in and you talk to me about it. And I've instituted a new process where we have these two iPads on these, they're not really, they're going to be on stands soon. The stands are on order. But right now they're like laying on the counter. But in my mind, they're still on stands. And so I have these two iPads where I went online, created an online form that says, hi, my name is, here's my email address. No, here's my preferred email address, which is usually not their campus email address. Here's the best way to reach me by phone, which is usually a cell phone. And then it says, how can I help you today? Because if you stop by and I'm away at a meeting or I'm in with another person, and you need to get a problem to me or get a question to me, use the iPad, put as much information as you can there. The moment you click submit, it sends an email directly to me. And I spend time, I schedule time in my days to respond to all of those emails. Well, the reason why that's important is the other day, I had a student who came to me and said, Dr. Strayhorn, I've got a problem. I want to go to medical school, but right now I'm not doing well in my science course, and so I need you to change me to a new instructor. Now, I don't know where you are in your academic term, but we're well into the semester here. And so as I read this email, I'm like, that's interesting. So I reach out to the student, I set up an appointment with them, I bring them in. Now, in preparation for that meeting, I asked my Dean of Retention for some data on this student. What I learned, interestingly, about this student who's going to medical school, who's having trouble in physical science and wants a new instructor, is he has a 14 and a 16 on the ACT. Secondly, he, coming out of high school, had really low grades in science. And this is his second time taking the physical science course. And I went to my Dean of Retention and asked her, like, at what point do we tell the student the hard message, and that is that we might want to think about what options are best suited for you with your skills. Because, and I think this is partly about coaching students in and out of majors. I think it's also about giving students really accurate feedback and information about their performance. Some of this will come up in a moment in a powerful anecdote, I hope. So I think it's really important, the power of promise. Promises to map onto plans. But a lot of the promises that we set with students have to always also be matched about assessment and information about their performance. Promises that are made without assessment or information about one's performance are often broken promises. I can say to you right now that I really want to be, I promise to be a great basketball player. But I'm going to tell you now, it's not going to happen. One reason why is because I already told you it's about beliefs. I don't want to be a good basketball player. I don't care about basketball. I don't have any time to practice basketball. People always say they've never met a black man that can't jump. Hello, here I am. My strongest muscle is in my brain. It is not on the basketball court. All right, so there it is. I'm just going to own. It's taken me a lifetime to own that, right? But all growing up, people would see me and say, "Oh, he's a black dude. I want him on my team." I'm like, "No, you don't." Now, if it's a spelling bee, I'm your dude. But I mean, otherwise, no. So this is important feedback I had to get about my performance, about my abilities, about my gifts and talents that allows me to set reasonable promises that really map on to those gifts and talents that I have in place. Now, this is not to say that I think that all of our abilities and gifts are fixed. I'm like Carol Dweck. Carol Dweck has a book called Mindset. In her book, Mindset, she argues there are two mindsets that operate in society. The first of these is a fixed mindset. Fixed mindset is the idea that we are all born with certain gifts, talents, and aptitudes. Whatever you're born with, that's what you got. Do the best you can and find success in life with it. If you are born a good leader, then you will be a good leader. If you are born a good speller, then you will spell well your entire life. If you are born an athlete, then you'll be an athlete. But if you're not, you'll never be. The second part of her thesis is this idea of growth-mindedness. And that is the idea that we are all works in progress. We can all get better. And that we get better, first of all, with effort and with practice and honestly with feedback. Part of our job as educators, if you believe in growth-mindedness, is to give students the feedback, the input that they need to get better and to improve. So if you're a person who says, "Oh, I hate to just crush their dreams and tell them that this is a lousy paper," you don't have to say it's a lousy paper, but if you tell them it's a great paper and you know it's a lousy paper, not only is that in a way sort of like educational malpractice, but it's also denying the student an opportunity to get better. Now, what I used to do before I read Carol Dweck's book really, we were speakers. I was the opening speaker at the Learning in the Brain conference in California several years ago. She was the closing speaker. I had not encountered her work. But by the time I met her and met her work, I read her book in the airport, and I couldn't put it down. It's a very delightful read, a really interesting thesis, I think a digestible and accessible thesis. But ultimately what it taught me as an instructor at that time was I needed to do more for my students to help them acquire those skills that we just talked about. I would tell students things like, hey, great paper, loved it, A+. Oh my gosh, you know, I kind of lost interest in the paper by the end. And I thought that was feedback, because that's the kind of feedback I got in graduate school. But what she called my attention to was questions like, what are the skills I'm trying to cultivate in my students? And what information am I giving them about their abilities in each of those domains? So rather than writing back and saying, hey, cool, font on this paper, A+, I would say things like, you know, okay, I want students to be avid readers. And so I would challenge them on how many sources they use in a paper and push them to go find additional sources. I wanted my students to be good writers that depended on primary sources. So I would give them feedback about depending on secondary sources and push them, gave them insights, advice about where to find more primary sources given their topic. Those kinds of nuggets are part of what we have to do that help students get information about their performance, to develop plans, to deliver on their promises. In fact, what I've learned from my research is this, that promises are goal-driven. They're based on thoughts and beliefs and feelings, and that they have power. That these kinds of positive psychology words really emanate out of my research on belonging. I tell students all the time, in fact, I texted a student yesterday who was having some struggles and missed a deadline for the first time in their college career. And I text them a delightful message, and then at the end of it said, just know this, that it gets better. But it doesn't get better on its own. It doesn't get better automatically. We make things better. And I think that's the part that we as educators can help. Students always say to me, oh my gosh, I'm failing in science, I just hope it gets better. It won't get better on its own. No, you've got to do something different. Get with your instructor, you know, talk to your instructor and ask for some YouTube videos that you can look at that will clarify or reaffirm some points from the lecture. You need to go to office hours, you need to study with a buddy, whatever it needs to happen. But usually educational experiences don't just get better automatically. It takes effort and time and work. Part of this is illustrating the kind of feedback that we will give the students that map onto feedback about their performance and helping them set a plan so ultimately they can deliver on promises. Now, let me give you one personal anecdote about this that I thought about that fits into this. This is my maternal grandmother, my mom's mom. She was born October 6, 1925. All my life, when I figured out my grandmother's age, for some reason I always held on to that information, and I would start estimating and counting dates in reference to my grandmother's birthday. So just happens to be that today is February 26th. We are still in Black History Month. Black History Month was founded by Carter G. Woodson as Negro History Week in 1925. I only know that because I've held on to these facts in reference to my grandmother's birthday, which helps you realize how central this woman is and has been always to my existence. It's my mom's mom. She was a public school teacher. She's a teacher, an educator like all of us. She committed herself, her career, to 52 years of teaching in public schools. 52 years. And then I remember she retired on a Friday. We had a party for her on a Saturday. She went to church on Sunday. And her pastor announced to the church, hey church, Miss Warner retired from being a teacher after 52 years. The whole church stood up and clapped, and my pastor asked my grandmother a question. He said, now Miss Warner, after 52 years of going to work at the school, what will you do tomorrow when you wake up now that you're retired? And she said, I hadn't even thought of that. I think I'll just get up and go right on back to school until I figure it out. And that Monday, my grandmother got up and went back to the school as a substitute teacher, and she did that until death. My grandmother loved teaching. She was a consummate educator. You know, when cleaning up her house and rearranging her living room, I took down some of the certificates that were on her wall. One of them called her a master teacher from Craven County Community, or Craven County Public Schools, the school district that she spent most of her career in. They called her a master teacher partly because of her tenure and the amount of time she devoted to teaching students in that district. But I think my grandmother was a master teacher. So many times I think about how she taught me things about even some of the stuff I'm talking with you today. I learned my first lessons about promises and plans and performance from my grandmother, not from a school. I was 7 years old in my grandmother's kitchen. She was cooking breakfast. My grandmother made the best breakfast. She made grits. She knows that I like my grits with salt and pepper, no butter. So she would make her grits, and then she'd pull out the ones for me, and then she'd add butter and all the stuff that other people like into the bigger pot, and she'd have a little bowl just for me, and I just sit on the side of the oven and watch my grandmother make breakfast. Now, I watched her for years. You would think that somewhere I learned how to cook. I did not, but I certainly learned how to watch her cook. And so one morning when she was making breakfast, my grandmother was making grits, and she was scrambling eggs and frying bacon, and my grandmother was a choir director. And I'm a choir director. And so my grandmother was not directing the choir, she was preparing for choir rehearsal. And she normally hummed the songs that she was going to teach that week in choir rehearsal while making breakfast sometime in the morning. My grandmother looked at me sitting on the stool. She said, "Rel, I want to teach you my favorite song." I looked at my grandmother and said, "Ma, every song is your favorite song." And she said, "Yeah, honey, but this one is my all-time favorite song." And I said, "Well, what are the words to the song?" She said, "The words to the song are, 'This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. This little light of mine,'" and my grandmother gave me all the words. And then she sang it. And then my grandmother, while flipping pancakes, turned to me and said, "Now, Rel, baby, you sing it." I said, I don't sing." She said, "You're a kid, and any kid who's in my house is going to do what I tell them to do. So I tell you to sing. You better sing." So like most, reluctant 7 or 8 year olds, I looked at my grandmother sitting on the bar stool, and I said, "This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine." I tried to do as best I could. My grandmother let me get all the way to the end of the song. She coached me through the words, and she said this. She said, "First of all, you sound terrible." She gave me honest feedback about my performance. She said, "But if I were you, honey, I would practice that song because you never know when you'll need it." That was a plan that she gave me, practice. Then she went over the song with me again. And I said, "I can't ever remember the words." My grandmother said, "Honey, if you ever need the words, close your eyes and just think about it. And I promise you, you'll always remember the words. Promise you, you'll always remember the words." Well, I don't know, maybe a couple weeks later, I always spent the summers with my grandmother. I was at Free Will Baptist Church in Trenton, North Carolina. My grandmother was about to direct the choir, and she got into the mic, and I thought, uh-oh, my grandma's about to sing a solo. And she went in front of the church, and she said, "Pastor, is it okay with you? I would like to do something different today in the service." And the pastor said, "Miss Warner, you're the choir director. Do whatever you want to do." She said, "Church, I want you to put your hands together for my grandson who is about to come and sing a solo for us." And I thought my brother had come into town, so I'm looking at him. And I thought, wow, I didn't even know he was here. And she looks at me and she says, "No, you come." And I'm like, "Me? No." And she says, "No, come on up here." I'm like, "No." She says, "Get up here." Before you know it, I run up, I'm standing in front of her, I look at her and say, "What do you want?" She said, "Remember what I told you to practice that song? Sing 'This Little Light of Mine." I said, "I don't even remember the words." And my grandmother did what good educators do to students. She stayed close to me, proximity, another P, and she whispered the words to me. You couldn't hear it in the church, but I heard it. I looked at my grandmother with tears in my eyes. I was so afraid to sing in front of all 61 people at her church. And so I said to her, "I don't remember the starting note." And my grandmother hummed the starting note in my ear. And then she did exactly what she told me to do in her kitchen. She said, "Now stop goofing off. Close your eyes and sing for Mama." Had she said sing for anybody who I did not know, I'd been too nervous. But once she said sing for Mama, she made it personal, another P. Students rise to the occasion. They rise to the expectations that we set for them when they have personal connections with us. So before you know it, I close my eyes, and y'all won't believe it, but when I close my eyes at Free Will Baptist Church, all I remember is I could almost hear my grandmother scrambling eggs again. I could almost smell the scent of bacon. I could almost hear the popping of the griddle. It was like I had been transported from this unfamiliar place that was really scary and isolating and alienating back to a familiar place, and that was my grandmother's kitchen. Without hesitation, I grabbed the mic and said, This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. My brother said, sing the second verse. I said, you didn't teach me. But that's what happens. I kept singing the verse over and over. Why? Because when I closed my eyes, I was transported back to a place that was familiar. Before you know it, I could deliver on the promise. I remembered the plan, and I used the information my grandmother had given me about the performance to make that moment personal. That is what students can do for us when we build connections with them. Connections with them are important because it tracks directly onto my research on belonging. Students want to belong. Everybody wants to belong. Everybody wants to matter. In the book, I talk about belonging being this feeling that you matter to people, that you're a part of a group, and also this notion of shared faith. Part of this is not just social science or educational science, it's just basic human needs. Takes us back to Maslow. Maslow says this: everybody's got basic needs: air, water, food, shelter, sleep, and sex. Maslow said it, not me. But you need to get some, because if you don't, and I'm talking about air, higher order needs like safety and security cannot rise. And once safety and security are in place, then even higher order needs like love and belongingness and affection and connection emerge. Look at this. If you look at it just geometrically, the only band that stands right in the middle of our basic needs like air, water, and food, and our highest potential, self-actualization, creativity, all the things that employers want students to have, the only band that stands right in the middle is love and belongingness. Said differently, belongingness, or the sense of belonging, is so critical to students' success. Students can't achieve their highest potential without feeling like they belong. They can't become self-actualized learners without connecting with educators and peers who signal to them that they matter, that people care about them, not just care about them because they're on a roster or on a roll, but care deeply about their success, their futures, their plans. In the book, I talk about sense of belonging being connected to mattering. Mattering is really important because it has 4 dimensions to it. I know I'm giving you a lot of information. I hope that you find it useful. There are 4 elements of mattering. The first of these is importance. Mattering has 4 elements. The first is importance. The second, dependence. The third, ego extension. And the fourth, attention. Mattering has 4 dimensions: importance, ego extension, dependence, and attention. Students feel like they belong when they feel like they matter. And they feel like they matter to us as individuals and to our institutions and our programs when they receive information or pick up cues, social cues, that they are important to us. I was at a keynote one time on a campus on an island in Michigan, I think, and I was getting coffee, and I was out in the front, and the students and the faculty and staff, or whoever was at the conference, there were students at this conference, they were arriving, and I overheard a student say something that gave me a really critical insight here about importance and attention and mattering. She arrived at the table where there were all these name badges, and she turns to her friend and she says, "Oh, they have our names printed on the name badges. Like they printed them and prepared for us." Students feel like they matter when they pick up cues that we prepared for them, that we made arrangements for them. And it can be as simple as prepared name badges. Or have you ever been to something, a meeting, and there were too few handouts? Or been somewhere and there were too few giveaways and you were left out? And remember what that feeling of feeling left out, not enough, feels like? That's what registers with students when they don't feel like we prepared for them. I go out of my way as much as possible at my own institution to make sure that when we have rosters and we have invite-only kind of events, that everyone who is invited is listed on the roster. The worst thing in the world is to attend an invite-only event where you were invited and have to add your name to the bottom of the list. Now, some people will, but not all people will publicly declare that as a moment of shame. But it is awkward to feel left out and alienated and forgotten. The problem with these thoughts is most of our social science shows that feelings of alienation, isolation, feeling forgotten track onto failure, not success. They are internalized as feelings of doubt. Doubt turns into a whole pattern of thoughts like, I'm not supposed to be here, I don't have what it takes to be here, people don't think about me, I'm out of place, I made the wrong decision, and all of those negative beliefs or negative self-beliefs end up leading to behaviors that track onto success. That's the pattern in which it happens. So students feel like they belong, they feel like they matter, they feel like they matter when they feel important, when they feel like they have our attention, when they feel like we need them. Dependence, and also ego extension. Ego extension is a big psychological term that I like to call the best friend effect. By a show of hands, how many of you in here have a BFF? You absolutely know you have at least one BFF and you can name the person. Okay, get that person in mind. Here's how you think about ego extension as it relates to mattering and belonging. Ego extension is the experience of oneself in another person. Your BFF or your partner, have you ever been talking to someone and they complete your sentences and you guys say, oh my gosh, we're like the Doublemint twins, this is so crazy, oh that's so annoying. Actually, people love that. Now you say that it's annoying, but psychologically we love the fact that someone knows us so well that they can complete our thoughts or complete our sentences. It might seem a little frustrating in the moment, but most science shows that actually the feelings that register with the body are feelings of affirmation and acceptance and love and belonging. So students feel like they matter when they experience ego extension. That is, I feel like I'm talking to myself. I feel like someone else feels like I do. I'm working with an instructor who wants me to pass this test just as much as I want to pass the test. I'm learning from a director of a program who wants me to get to college just as much as I want to get to college. Something happens that registers this message with the student that not only are we here to help, but we're here to help you. And if you do your part, we'll do our part. In fact, we're here in your corner rooting for you. That's the BFF effect that is really ego extension. Most BFFs know this. If you were to call your BFF today and say, hey BFF, most people don't call their BFF, but hey best friend, you know what? Your best friend says, hey, how's your day going? And you say, well, it started off great. I heard from this really wonderful keynote speaker. And then, but then it went downhill. They say, well, why did it go downhill? And you say, well, because my boss called me. And my boss was getting on my case. And your best friend knows that the very best thing they can say, when you start talking about your boss getting on your nerves, especially if you're really ranting about your boss, no best friend interrupts that rant and says, what did you do to deserve that? You know what? I got your bosses back here. You really are annoying. No BFF does that. Most BFFs, when you call them and say, hey best friend, how'd it go? I had this great speaker, and then my boss called me, and oh, I can't stand my boss. They just always are nagging. Your best friend takes over the conversation and says, you know what, I can't stand your boss. Your best friend doesn't even know your boss. Usually best friends say things like, you know what, that boss better get off your back or I'm going to come down there and give them a piece of my mind. Most best friends know that nothing would be more embarrassing professionally than for your BFF to show up on your job and let your boss have it. So not only would you be terminated, but it'd go viral somehow. So before you know it, BFFs have sent you multiple messages to say this. 1, I'm here for you. 2, I understand. 3, I've got your back. 4, you don't have to explain. I'm here to help. Students feel like they belong when they feel like they matter. When they feel like they matter when they experience educators and educative moments, programs, courses, college experiences, high school experiences that send the message that somebody understands, empathizes, has my back, will come to my defense, will listen, And all of that is important because those messages that we send, sometimes through signs, sometimes through messages, sometimes through our actions, even through our policies that say we are going to provide support to students who are first generation to college. And you call it out. I've done research on foster youth. There are 200,000 foster youth in the country. Every single year, about 21,000 age out of the foster care system. Upon aging out, 87% of foster youth say, I want to go to college. Still today, less than 9% of foster youth ever earn a college degree. We've got to get foster youth geared up for college. But to do it, we're going to need policies and programs and pathways that are designed specifically for them. And when we design policies, programs, pathways, videos, conferences, brochures that call out, name them as a population, what we're actually doing is not so much tied up in affirmative action. What we're doing is telling them you matter. You matter so much that we're going to name your experience. We're going to name you. Seeing yourself in print registers this message that people thought about me. They are aware of me. And part of that fosters belonging. Here's what my research shows, that belonging tracks on to student success. Students who belong actually earn higher grades, have better school attendance. My best insight about that one comes from a school in Illinois, College of Lake County. I was giving a talk there, getting into the elevator, a young man dove, I talk about this in the second edition book, dove into the elevator, right as the elevator doors are closing, he just sort of slides right in. I'm like, oh my gosh, you almost got killed. He said, yeah, but I have to get to class. I said, well, what class are you going to risk your life for? He said, it's biology. Now, you don't hear that every day. I said, why biology? What's your major? He said, I'm a music major. Now, you don't hear that either. A music major going out of his way for a biology class. He said, but I love biology. Not biology, but I love my biology class. I said, why do you love your biology class? He said, my instructor. I love my instructor. I said, really? I said, yeah. I said, what led you to love your instructor? Because my instructor loves me. I said, how do you know your instructor loves you? He tells us every day. I said, like, good morning, class, I love you? He said, no. First of all, he's always on time. Secondly, when we come to class, he meets us at the door, and he high fives and handshakes and pats us on the back as we come in. He calls us each by our name. You'll see in the first edition of the book and the second edition of the book, I underscore many times that one way we can signal to students that they matter and we care about them, that fosters a sense of belonging, is by learning their names. It is true human behavior. It is difficult for us to feel like we belong in a place where we go by, hey, you, I can't really whistle, you over here, you with the glasses, you over there. That's usually not the way we prefer to be referred to. But when we are called by our name, we lighten up, we are energized, we are motivated and called to action. So learning students' names. This instructor does a number of things. Like, first of all, on the first day of class I learned, he tells his students, you know what, I went to graduate school, I got a degree in biology. He says this, and I quote it in the book, but everything I learned in graduate school was for waste if you're not here every day in class to meet me. I simply can't have this class without you. I need you to be here. Dependence. Students go out of their way to get to class when they feel that personal connection that we talked about earlier. It also tracks on to higher graduation rates, and ultimately they become connected as alumni. I'm going to close with the insight that I got from this email that I received back in 2016. I also call this out in the book in the second edition. The first edition, it hadn't happened yet. I wrote this, the first edition of the Belonging book in 2012. And I say what happened to me since 2012 is I've really figured out how belonging happens in educational spaces. When I was at SUNY Binghamton about to speak to their student affairs staff, I got this email from a student at my previous institution. Email says something like, hey, Dr. Strayhorn, would it be possible for me to move into a day early because my mom got the dates confused and booked a hotel from... Have you ever read an email that you're like, what the heck are you talking about, right? I got this email. At the time I was a professor and a center director, and some students asking me about moving in early. I'm like, move in where? I'm not looking for a roommate. And before you know it, I write back midway the screen saying, help me understand what in the world you're referring to. Move in where? And have you ever gotten an email that you just want to hit delete because you're pretty sure this has nothing to do with anything in your immediate to-do list? But increasingly, as I learn more about students and student success, it's hard for me to hit delete on an email just because I'm confused, because it might be a student in need of help. Have you ever been so lost in the grocery store that you didn't know which aisle to look for spice or which aisle to look for sugar? What if the whole grocery store just disappeared in the middle of your confusion? What you really need is for someone to hang in there, to lean into your confusion, and to help you, steer you, navigate you into the direction you need. So what I ended up doing was going back and forth with the student. I learned from him that actually he's an incoming student who was trying to move into the residence halls a day early. For some reason, he asked me for permission. I wrote back to him and said, well, no, I don't grant permission to the residence halls. I've never worked in housing. I don't work in student affairs. I don't think I even lived in the residence halls very long at my own undergraduate institution, except for 4 years. And so before you know it, I write him back and I said, but I'm copying onto this note all of the folks who I think can help you. I copied the Vice President of Student Affairs, I copied some of my graduate students who worked in housing, I copied the Director of Housing, and I asked them, my colleagues, my friends, our educator peers, please help this student. I went to go give my talk, I came back to my phone, there were 7 or 8 messages back and forth. I looked at the last one first, and it said something like, Dr. Strayhorn, you rock, my mom loves you. And I thought, well, tell your mom to put a ring on it because I'm still single. Joke. But I ended up writing back to him. I wrote back to our colleagues and thanked them for following up. I'll come to that in the end. But I wrote back to him and I said, hey, by the way, where did you get my name? I don't work in housing. I'm not the Vice President of Student Affairs. My name is nowhere on the housing website. How did you write me out of, I don't know, 4,000 faculty at my former institution? And he wrote back and said, I said, you know, I thought my name was on some bathroom wall that said like, hey, want to move into your residence hall, early contact Strayhorn? If so, we need to get that off of there. He said, no, don't you remember, Dr. Strayhorn? When me and my mom came to the Aspiring Students Weekend, you were the keynote speaker. And we will never forget, at the end of your keynote, you said, if there's ever anything I can do for you, I'm here to help. The reason why that's important is on your tables there are sheets of paper that says something about a promise. Students and their families, their moms, their dads, their aunties, their uncles, they're listening to us. Every promise that we make, they're expecting us to hold, to deliver on. I did not know that day when I made that statement how many times students listen, and then when they're in trouble, they don't know to go to the Vice President of Student Affairs. They don't know to go to the Director of Gear Up. They go to the person who they feel that they have a connection with. That personal connection is the lifeline to providing that help. The same way in which it was that personal connection with my grandmother in that church that provided the lifeline that helped me in that moment. Well, if you looked at the slide earlier, there's another date. October 6, 1925 is when she was born. November 23rd, 2013 was when she died. November 19th, 2013 is when my mom called me and said, hey, Rel, come to Craven County Community Hospital. Your grandmother suffered an aneurysm and she's in the hospital. It was a call I had hoped to never get in my life. When my grandmother turned 80, I was a professor by that time, and my grandmother made a lot of sacrifices for me. So when she turned 80, one of the things I started doing for her was I would write her a check on her birthday. And on her 80th birthday, I gave her $80. And on her 81st birthday, I gave her $81. And every now and again, I would tell my grandmother, I can't wait to write you a check for $200. My grandmother knew that she would probably never live to be 200, but she let me live with that dream. 88 was the last one I got to write. I remember when my grandmother called me, my mom called me and told me to come to Craven County Community Hospital, 2nd floor, room 213. All my life when I got in my grandmother's presence, she came alive and she would say things like, hey, Rel, hey, baby, and she would give me big hugs. When I got to Craven County Community Hospital, 2nd floor, room 213, when I got to 212, I didn't know what condition I would find my grandmother in, so I braced myself, took a deep breath, and then I got to 213, I jumped from the door and said, hey, Ma, And the woman in the bed turned, looked at the door, said nothing, looked away. So I knew then my grandmother was already starting to leave us. I looked at my mom. I say I'm the fun size. My mom is the funner size. She's like 5'1" and like 100 pounds. I reached out for my mom. I hugged her. Have you ever hugged someone who's on the verge of tears and your close proximity and care and love was all they needed to just let it go? I hugged my mom and all of her weight fell into me. I could feel the tears stained on my sleeve of my shirt as I held my mom and went down to the floor. Then I just sat on the floor and held my mom while she cried about her mom. She's the only child who was in the bed. I said, Mom, you're tired. You need to go home and rest. My mom said, I cannot go home and rest. I got to take care of my mom. I said, you don't have to take care of your mom. I'm here now. She said, baby, you're not a nurse. I said, no, I'm a doctor. And so my mom went home and I took care of my grandmother for the next couple of days. I washed her hair. I cleaned up her messes. I changed her diapers. I wiped up her everything. I took care of her because my grandmother took care of me. That's important for you to know because some of the students that we work with come from families and communities and neighborhoods where aunties and grandmas and cousins and people who they are not biologically related to made sacrifices for them that they are deeply connected with and tied to. Part of their success is helping those people be successful. Their success is tied up with them. I wouldn't be here today as your speaker if it hadn't been for this woman, my maternal grandmother. So that night, November 19, 2013, I remember going to sleep and the nurse came into the room and said, Dr. Strayhorn, do you want a cot to sleep on? I said, no, I don't want a cot. I want to sleep in this chair. She said, the chair is really uncomfortable. I said, that's okay as long as my grandmother is comfortable. So all I remember is going to sleep in this uncomfortable chair holding my grandmother's hand in the bed. I say that because as educators, sometimes we had to sit in uncomfortable seats while we create comfort for our students and their families. Sometimes we had to sit in uncomfortable meetings and make uncomfortable declarations of promises that we will deliver upon because we got to make it comfortable for our students. And while sitting in this uncomfortable seat, somehow I drifted off to sleep. But remember when I was 7 years old, my grandmother told me to practice that song because I never know when I need it. Here's the story I love talking about. At 1:17 a.m., I was awakened out of my sleep by the most violent shaking of my grandmother's hand I will ever remember. Still to this day, sometimes when my hand shakes, I think about that moment. 1:17 a.m. I was awakened out of my sleep. I looked at the clock. It said 1:17 a.m. I looked at my grandmother. I said, Ma, are you okay? She looked at me and she said, hey, Rail. I said, my grandmother's coming back to life. She knows my name. So I reached for the button, you know, the one I'm talking about, that would like call for the nurse. And before you know it, the TV pops on. I reach back again for another button. Before you know it, now the phone is going. I don't know how to get the nurse, but my grandmother snatches my hand back and she says, Rail, honey, baby, let's sing my favorite song. And without hesitation, my grandmother said, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. She said, baby, now you take the next verse. I said, this little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. She said, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. I thought we would do it together at the end. I held her hand, came in close and said, let it shine, let it shine. My grandmother's an alto, I'm a tenor. But as I hit the last line, let it shine, I realized I was the only one singing. And somewhere, while singing her favorite song, my grandmother transitioned, leaving me with one of the most powerful lessons ever. And that is that if you look at the word education in the Latin, it means to draw out the light that is within. Every day, we get to work with our students to connect with the light that my grandmother taught me to sing about, to help them realize that they can make plans to deliver on their promises, and that with those promises, they are guaranteed a bright and promising future. On your darkest day, you are some students' best hope. On your darkest day, you are the only light that some students will ever see. That if you have not already realized it, you might be the only person who will ever tell a student that they are college material or that they can get there. Part of the reason why we came to this conference today is not just to reach consensus, not just to reach change, but to also realize that there is enormous power in the promise of education. I hope you count it a privilege to be an educator every day. Thank you.
Thanks again, Dr. Strayhorn. I got a couple notes, hard to follow up.